I'm writing this down because someone needs to know. Maybe no one will believe me, maybe no one can help, but at least if I disappear, there will be a record of what happened. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 38 years old, and until a few months ago, I was living what most people would call a perfectly ordinary life in Morgantown, West Virginia. I had a steady job in cybersecurity at a mid-sized software firm, a small 2-bedroom apartment, and a rescue mutt named Rex who had more emotional intelligence than most people I've ever worked with. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. It was stable. Then I found the files. I won't get into the specifics, partly because I don't know who might read this, and partly because the details still make my hands shake when I think about them too hard. What I can say is this: the company I worked for was doing something with user data that went far beyond aggressive monetization. The kind of thing that doesn't just violate privacy agreements, the kind of thing that can end careers, destroy families, get people hurt, real people. Thousands of them. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I did what I thought was right. I reported it. I went through what I believed were the proper channels, and when those channels turned out to be clogged with the same rot I was trying to expose, I went outside them. It was the worst decision of my life. Within 10 days, I was terminated. Not just fired, surgically removed from every professional network I'd spent 12 years building. My name appeared on lists I was never supposed to know existed. Recruiters stopped returning calls. Former colleagues stopped making eye contact. My savings drained faster than I'd planned because I'd never planned to need them like this. Rex needed food. My landlord was no longer sending polite reminders about rent. I was scanning job boards at 2 in the morning when I found the listing. Night receptionist needed. Creekside Motor Inn, Burnsville, Virginia. $50 an hour. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. No experience necessary. Immediate start. $50 an hour for a motel night receptionist. I stared at it long enough that Rex came over and put his head in my lap, the way he does when he senses something is wrong. I stroked his ears and called the number anyway. A rough, unhurried voice told me to come in that evening for an interview. No resume needed, just show up. The drive to Burnsville took nearly 90 minutes. The sun was bleeding out along the ridgeline when I pulled onto the county road and saw the sign for the first time. Creekside Motor Inn sat at the edge of a 2-lane state route, set back maybe 100 feet from a drainage creek that looked like it hadn't held water in a decade. The name made more sense as a historical artifact than a description. It was the kind of place you'd see in the background of a movie to establish that a character had hit rock bottom. An L-shaped 2-story structure with exterior corridors, the room doors painted a green that might have been cheerful in 1987, the paint now peeling at every corner like sunburned skin. The neon sign out front flickered intermittently. The letters INN had burned out entirely, leaving Creeks Dem Tor blinking against the darkening sky in a way that felt less like a malfunction and more like a warning. I parked in the near-empty lot and went into the office. A bell above the door announced me. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and something medicinal. Mothballs maybe, or whatever industrial cleaner had been applied to the carpet so many times it had become part of the fiber. Behind the front desk sat an old man. I mean, genuinely old. The kind of old where you stop trying to estimate and just accept that time has done something profound to a person's face. His skin was a landscape of deep lines, the sort that come not just from age, but from a life spent in weather, in worry, in whatever it is that carves a person hollow and fills the space with something harder. He didn't look up from his newspaper. "Help you?" he said. The voice matched what I'd heard on the phone, gravel on gravel. "I'm Daniel Marsh. I called earlier about the night position." He folded the newspaper with the deliberateness of someone who has never been in a hurry for anything and fixed me with a look that I can only describe as measuring. Not my qualifications, me. Something about me that he was checking against something internal. "You sure you want it?" he asked. "Yes." I almost said I need it, which was more accurate, but something about the way he asked made me hold that back. That's why I'm here. He nodded, slow and considered. All right then, tonight, 11 to 7, 50 cash. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, which he set on the counter between us without sliding it toward me. I had to reach for it. Read that, memorize it. Don't write anything down. Don't mention it to anyone. Break a rule, you're done. Any questions? I had approximately 40 questions. What came out was, don't you want to ask me anything? References, background? You showed up, he said. That's the interview. He stood and lifted his coat from the back of the chair. Not everyone does. I sat in my car for 15 minutes with the folded paper in my hand before I opened it. Night shift rules. Creekside Motor Inn. Rule 1. At 11:20 p.m., turn off the neon sign. Turn it back on at exactly 6:50 a.m. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Rule 2. If you hear knocking from inside the ice machine, ignore it. Do not open the ice machine between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. under any circumstances. Rule 3. Room 114 is always listed as vacant. If a guest asks, tell them it's under renovation. If you see a figure standing at the window of room 114 from inside, do not look at it for more than 3 seconds. Rule 4. The phone in the office will ring at 3:15 a.m. every night. Answer it, but do not speak. Listen for exactly 60 seconds, then hang up. Rule 5. If a guest checks in under the name Robert Cole, give them the key to room 108 regardless of availability. Do not look directly at their face. Rule 6. The vending machine in the lobby will sometimes dispense items that are not food or drinks. If this happens, take the item outside and bury it in the dirt behind the building. Do not touch it with your bare hands. Rule 7. At 5:45 a.m., lock yourself in the supply closet. Stay inside for exactly 5 minutes. Do not come out early, no matter what you hear on the other side of the door. I read it 3 times. My first instinct, the rational, grounded instinct I'd spent my adult life cultivating, said, hazing ritual, new employee prank. But the old man's eyes came back to me, the weight in them, the careful way he'd watched me pick up the paper, like he was watching someone sign something that couldn't be unsigned. I thought about Rex's food bowl, about the stack of late notices on my kitchen counter, about the way my former supervisor had smirked at me when I was escorted out of the building. I got out of the car. The man working the previous shift was maybe 30, with a hollow-eyed look of someone who had gone several rounds with something that didn't fight fair. He was already standing when I came in at 11:15, his bag over his shoulder. "You the new guy?" "Daniel." I stuck out my hand. He looked at it. "Good luck," he muttered, and moved past me toward the door. "Any advice?" I called after him. He stopped, didn't turn around. "Follow the rules." And then he was gone, his car out of the lot before I'd even settled into the chair behind the desk. At 11:20, I stepped outside and flipped the switch on the neon sign. The parking lot dropped into near darkness, the only light coming from the dim amber fixtures at either end of the building's 2 corridors. As my eyes adjusted, I became aware of something I can't explain clinically, a pressure, a wrongness in the direction of room 114. When I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Just a door like any other door, green paint peeling at the bottom corner. But in my peripheral vision, something that wasn't quite a shape suggested itself for just a moment. I went back inside and didn't look at room 114 again that night. Around 1 in the morning, my first real guests arrived, a middle-aged couple in a road-worn pickup truck, tired and grateful for a vacancy. Normal transaction. The woman asked if the vending machine had coffee, and I told her it did, which I had no idea if it was true. They went to room 201 on the upper corridor and I sat back down and thought, maybe this won't be so bad. At 2:07 a.m., the ice machine started. The first sound was subtle, a tap against the interior metal, the way you might knock politely on a door you weren't sure anyone was behind. Then it came again, slightly harder. By 2:15, the tapping had become something else. Not knocking anymore, but something more frantic, more desperate. The sound of something trying to find a way out through a surface that refused to give. And underneath it, or inside it, or somehow threaded through it, a sound that my brain kept trying to classify as the building settling, as pipes contracting in the cold, as anything other than what it actually sounded like. A voice, muffled and distorted, but unmistakably human. I couldn't make out words. I didn't need to. Desperation has a sound that crosses every language, every barrier. Whatever was in that ice machine was not a machine malfunction. I pressed both hands over my ears and stared at the clock on the wall. Do not open the ice machine between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. At some point, I must have squeezed my eyes shut, because when I opened them, it was 2:51 and the sound had stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full, packed dense with the absence of the thing that had just been there. My shirt was soaked through. I turned to the ancient desktop computer on the desk, desperate for any distraction, and noticed two things I hadn't registered on my initial survey of the office. The monitor screen was cracked, a web of fractures spreading from somewhere near the upper right corner, and the keyboard had a dark smear across the middle row of keys. Old, dried to a crust. I leaned closer before I could stop myself. It was the color of old rust. I pushed my chair back until it hit the wall behind me and kept my hands in my lap for the next 20 minutes. The phone rang at exactly 3:15. I'd been watching the clock, but the sound still made me lurch sideways in the chair, hard enough to knock a pen cup off the desk. I picked up the receiver with both hands and pressed it to my ear. Said nothing. Static first, white noise like a television between channels. Then, beneath it, not replacing it, but woven through it like a second audio track, voices. Multiple voices, overlapping, arguing about something in tones too low to parse. Then footsteps, the creak of old floorboards, a door opening. Then a voice, clear and close and utterly calm, as though the speaker were standing just on the other side of the desk. "We've been waiting for you, Daniel." I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper. "Did you really think you could just run? That you could forget?" A pause, something that might have been amusement in it. "There's so much you need to remember, Daniel, and you will. You will remember all of it." The line went dead. I sat holding the receiver until the automated off-hook tone kicked in, then slowly placed it back in the cradle, stood up, walked to the small bathroom behind the office and ran cold water over my wrists and the back of my neck. When I looked up into the mirror, my reflection looked like a stranger's, pale and hollow-eyed, a man who had aged several years in the past 4 hours. And on the mirror's surface, in the condensation that had no business being there in this cold, unheated room, 2 words: "Remember, Daniel." I didn't scream. I want to be honest about the fact that it was a near thing. At 4:20 a.m., a man came in and asked for a room. He gave the name Robert Cole. My hands went still on the keyboard. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips as I reached behind me and took the key to room 108 from the pegboard, set it on the counter without looking up. I busied myself with the registration form. Name, vehicle information, method of payment, all of it conducted with my eyes on the paper. He paid cash, exact change, placed on the counter beside my hand rather than into it. When he turned to go, my eyes involuntarily tracked upward, not to his face, I caught myself before that, but to the plate glass window behind him that reflected the entire lobby. In that reflection, where his face should have been, there was simply nothing. Not darkness, not a blur, just smooth, unbroken skin stretching from forehead to chin, featureless as a palm. He walked to room 108. The door opened and closed. I sat perfectly still for several minutes. At 5:20, the vending machine at the end of the lobby made a sound. Not the mechanical thunk of a snack dropping, something softer, like something had been set down gently. I found it in the dispensing tray, a piece of material about the size of my palm, dark and stiff, dry as parchment, but with a texture that wasn't quite leather and wasn't quite anything else I could name. It was covered in markings, carved or burned into the surface in tight, precise patterns that my eyes kept sliding away from, like trying to hold a grip on something that didn't want to be held. Not any writing system I recognized, not decorative, something purposeful and completely illegible to me. I remembered Rule 6. I went behind the check-in counter and found a pen, used it to push the thing into a plastic bag from the small trash can. The moment the bag sealed around it, the plastic began to discolor, brown, then black, the edges curling and contracting like burning paper. I dropped it, swore under my breath, and kicked the whole thing out through the lobby's side door with my foot. I didn't look back at it. At 5:45, I walked into the supply closet, shelves of toilet paper rolls and cleaning chemicals and paper towels, and locked the door behind me. Checked my watch. 5:45:00. For 4 minutes and 20 seconds, nothing happened. I stood in the small space with my back against the shelving unit and began to feel, slowly and against my better judgment, somewhat foolish. Maybe the supply closet rule was just the old man covering some liability I didn't understand. Maybe the whole night had been a series of coincidences that my sleep-deprived, stress-saturated brain had assembled into a horror story. Then, at 5:49 and some seconds, I heard it. Breathing, just outside the door. Low and deliberate, too slow to be human resting, too irregular to be mechanical. And then a sound like something very large and very heavy settling its weight against the other side of the door. The handle turned. Once, twice. Something hit the door. Not knocked, hit. The kind of impact that comes from something with mass behind it, something that isn't asking. The door bent inward at the center. The frame groaned. A screw worked loose from the upper hinge and dropped onto the floor near my feet. I pressed myself into the back corner between the shelves and the wall, one hand clamped over my mouth, and watched my watch. 5:59. The impacts continued, each one harder. 5:59 and 30 seconds. The light fixture overhead flickered. 5:59 and 50 seconds. Silence. I watched the second hand complete its last rotation and tick past the 12. 6 a.m. exactly. I stood in the silence for a full minute before I touched the door handle. When I opened it, the hallway was empty. No damage on the outside of the door, no marks on the floor, no sign of anything. I turned the neon sign on at exactly 6:50. The parking lot filled with the flat gray light of early morning, and I have never in my life been so profoundly grateful for an overcast sky. The old man arrived at 7 sharp. He looked me over with that same measuring expression, taking in the state of my hair, the dark rings under my eyes, the way I was sitting, very still with both hands flat on the desk, as though I needed the stability. "You made it," he said. He didn't sound congratulatory. He sounded, if anything, mildly surprised. "What is this place?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He ignored the question. "Still want the job?" I thought about Rex, about my landlord, about the smear on the keyboard and the voice on the phone and the smooth, blank space where Robert Cole's face should have been. "I'll be back tonight," I said. He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once and moved around the desk. As I walked to the door, he spoke without looking at me. "Money isn't worth your soul, son." I'm not sure I have one left to sell, I said, and walked out into the gray morning. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. An unknown number. 3 words. Good job, Daniel. Night 2. I spent the day in something that wasn't quite sleep and wasn't quite waking. I lay on my couch with Rex wedged against my legs and stared at the ceiling while my mind churned over the night like a machine that couldn't find the off switch. I searched for Creekside Motor Inn online with the thoroughness of someone who had once been paid to find things that didn't want to be found. Nothing. No reviews, no listing on any booking platform, no mention in any local business directory. A motel that had been operating, visibly with a neon sign, in Burnsville, West Virginia for what looked like at least 30 years. And it didn't exist on the internet in any meaningful way. That's not how abandoned places work. That's not even how neglected businesses work. That takes effort. As evening approached and the decision became unavoidable, I sat on my kitchen floor for a while with Rex's head in my lap. A memory came to me without warning. Not a thought, not a deduction, but something surfacing from somewhere below the level of conscious recall. A white room, very bright, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting, and a man in a white coat leaning over me saying something I couldn't hear clearly. Something about successful completion, something about secondary pathways. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before it dissolved, but it left behind a feeling, the feeling of having had something taken from you, the particular cold absence that comes after a loss you can't quite name. I didn't know what to do with that. I drove to Burnsville anyway. The old man was there when I arrived early, newspaper opened to the same page as the night before. Or possibly he'd just gone back to the beginning. He looked up when I came in, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, more like resignation. "Listen," he said, setting the paper down. "You made it through one night. That's more than most. But it gets worse from here. I'm asking you straight. Are you sure?" "I need the money," I said. Then, "And I need to know what's happening here." He shook his head slowly. Those two things might not both be possible. He stood and gathered his coat. "Drawer," he said. "New rule tonight." He left before I could ask anything else. The note in the drawer was written in the same hand as the others. Rule 8. If you see a child standing outside the office door at any point during the night, do not let her in. Do not open the door. Do not engage with anything she says. The first few hours passed without incident. A trucker in his 60s checked in around 1 a.m., weathered, soft-spoken, clearly exhausted from a long haul. Normal transaction. I gave him room 203, and he thanked me, and that was that. Except for his hands. I caught a glimpse before he pocketed them. The staining was black and thick, the way old motor grease looks, but it caught the light differently. Almost iridescent, shifting slightly at the edges, like an oil slick on water. He noticed me noticing. "Trouble with the rig," he said. Didn't meet my eyes, took his key. After he'd gone, I washed my hands twice at the bathroom sink, even though I hadn't touched him. The 3:15 call came on schedule. This time, the static resolved into the sound of an old film projector, that distinctive mechanical clicking, the sound of celluloid feeding through a gate, and then a man's voice, clipped and professional, reading from something. Subject DM continues to resist standard memory suppression protocols. Recommend escalating to advanced reconditioning. Note: subject has demonstrated unusual retention in lateral memory structures, may require full reset rather than targeted suppression. Click. Silence. DM. Daniel Marsh. I sat with the dead phone in my hand for a long time. The terminology was clinical, detached, the language of a report or a medical file. Memory suppression, reconditioning, full reset, science fiction vocabulary. Except for the name. Except for the fact that it matched the flash I'd had that morning, the white room, the bright lights, the man in the coat. except for the wall I could feel inside my own head when I pushed towards certain memories, certain periods, certain questions about my own history that should have had answers and didn't. At 4:17 a.m., something tapped on the office door. I had been half dozing over a years-old copy of a regional tourism magazine, the irony of which was not lost on me, and the sound snapped me upright like a current had run through the chair. Soft, deliberate, the tap of small knuckles on glass. I turned. She was standing on the other side of the door's window panel, maybe 8 years old, or the size of an 8-year-old. My brain kept trying to calibrate and kept failing, because something about her proportions was slightly wrong in a way I couldn't isolate. Dark hair, braided neatly, a white dress, clean and pressed, wrong for the temperature and the hour. She held a stuffed rabbit against her chest with both arms. Her face was a child's face. Her eyes were not. They were old in a way that had nothing to do with age. Not wise, old. The kind of old that accumulates in places where bad things have happened and kept happening. Sediment layering over sediment over centuries. "Please," she said. Her voice came through the glass, muffled but clear. "Please let me in. I'm lost. I don't know where I am." I gripped the armrests of my chair. If you see a child standing outside the office door, do not let her in. Do not open the door. "I can't open the door," I said. My voice came out remarkably level, which surprised me. "I'm so sorry. I can call someone for you, the police, or—" "There's something out here." Her voice didn't waver. No child scared in the dark. Flat and certain. "Something in the parking lot. It's been watching me. Please, mister. Please just open the door." Every decent instinct I possessed screamed at me. A child, alone, in the dark, afraid. But those eyes. "I'm sorry," I said again, and meant it, and stayed in my chair. Her face changed. I don't have better language for it than that. Not gradually. Changed, the way a light switches off. The pleading expression dropped away, and what replaced it was something so far outside the range of what a child's face should be able to hold that my mind kept trying to reject the image even as I was looking at it. Ancient, furious, something that had been waiting a very long time for exactly this and had not gotten it. When she spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of childhood. It was layered, multiple registers, multiple ages, as though several voices had been recorded over each other until they blurred into one. "You'll regret this, Daniel Marsh. You can't hide from what you've done. We will make you remember. We will make you face every single thing you've tried to bury." And then she was gone. No footsteps, no shadow crossing the window, present one moment and simply entirely absent the next. I sat in the silence of the office for what the clock later told me was nearly 40 minutes, though it felt like both longer and shorter than that simultaneously. The question she'd left behind carved itself into the inside of my skull. What have I done? Not what had been done to me. What had I done? What was there to face? I don't clearly remember turning the sign back on, or the old man arriving, or getting to my car. I know it happened because I was in my car on the highway home and the sun was coming up in the east and the sign behind me said 6:50 on the digital clock. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. 2 nights down. The past always catches up, Daniel. I deleted it and drove home. Rex was at the door, tail going, completely indifferent to the existential crisis his owner was undergoing. I poured food into his bowl and leaned against the kitchen counter and let the ordinary domestic fact of it, dog, bowl, morning, kitchen, wash over me. The flash came back harder this time. The white room, the lights, the man in the coat, but this time I could see more of him. 50s, gray at the temples, rectangular glasses. He was not unkind. He was not cruel. He had the expression of someone performing a necessary procedure, a doctor setting a bone. He was talking to someone I couldn't see, someone standing behind me. Secondary suppression complete. Subject will retain full functional memory up to the induction point. Everything prior will present as normal recall. He won't know what's missing because he won't know there was anything to miss. I slid down the cabinet until I was sitting on the kitchen floor. Rex finished his food and came and sat beside me. "What did they take?" I asked him. He didn't know. He put his head on my knee anyway. One thing was becoming undeniable. Creekside Motor Inn was not just a strange place with inexplicable rules. It was connected to me, to something in my past that had been removed or hidden or buried so deep I'd been living on top of it without knowing the ground was hollow beneath me. And whatever it was, the motel, the phone calls, the child with old eyes, the lab coat and the clinical voice on the recorder, it wanted me to remember. God help me. I needed to go back. Night 3. I spent most of the following day trying to do what I used to do professionally, dig for information that didn't want to be found. I searched local archives, historical databases, county records for Burnsville and the surrounding area. I found one thing, a forum post from 2019, archived and de-indexed but accessible through a cache, in which someone described driving through Burnsville and experiencing a period of missing time, roughly 40 minutes they couldn't account for, combined with a persistent feeling of being watched. The post had been removed from the original forum. The account that posted it had been deleted. I saved the cache page. I also spent time sitting very still and pressing on the interior walls of my own memory, looking for the hollow places. There was one significant gap, a period of roughly 7 months, about 3 years ago, that I could account for in broad strokes, but not in detail. I had told myself it was a difficult period, a depression, the kind of time that doesn't leave clear impressions. But when I actually tried to locate specific memories from those months, a face, a conversation, a meal, anything concrete, I found smooth blankness. Not the haziness of ordinary forgetting, something too clean, too uniform to be natural. I arrived at the motel at 10:45. The office was empty. In the drawer, another note. Rule 9. At exactly 1:45 a.m., go to the vending machine and press A2 once, then D4 twice. Take whatever comes out and place it inside your left shoe, under your foot. Do not look at it. I read it twice, put it back in the drawer, and settled into the chair behind the desk. The early hours were quiet. No guests, no sounds from outside, just the building's ambient creaking and the distant sound of a dog somewhere down the road that might have been my imagination. The silence had a texture to it by now, a particular quality that I was learning to read the way you learn to read weather. This was not peaceful silence, it was waiting silence. At 1:45 a.m., I stood before the vending machine. A2, D4, D4. The machine hummed for a moment, a sound that was slightly too high-pitched, that sat at the upper edge of comfortable hearing. Then something dropped into the dispensing tray, not the clatter of a packaged snack, but something lighter, with a resonant quality, like a coin dropping onto a hard surface from a height. I looked away and reached in. Small, cold, metal, but not a coin. The shape was wrong, too thick, with raised patterns on both sides that I could feel with my fingertips without being able to interpret. I unlaced my left shoe, set the object on the insole, and laced it back up. The moment my foot pressed down on it, I heard something. Not from outside, not from the machine or the building, but from somewhere close and sourceless, like a sound generated inside the architecture of the space around me. A whisper. One voice. Too low to resolve into words. I walked back to the front desk faster than I meant to and spent 10 minutes not looking at my left foot. The 3:15 call. No film projector this time. The static resolved immediately into a voice. The same flat, clinical tone I'd heard the night before, but reading from something different, something that felt live rather than recorded. Subject is re-accessing suppressed material via environmental anchor The Creekside Protocol is accelerating reconditioning against intended direction. Recommend immediate site review. Note: subject should not have been able to find the listing. Investigate source of referral. A pause. If subject achieves full recall before extraction, containment protocol applies. Click. I sat with those last two words for a long time. Containment protocol. Whatever I had been involved in, whatever had happened during those 7 blank months 3 years ago, these people, whoever they were, had decided that the best outcome was for me to never remember it. The motel, the rules, the objects, the voice on the phone, they were designed to keep something buried. Or maybe they were designed to dig it up. I couldn't tell anymore which side wanted what. At 4:50, I saw the trucker from the first night, or someone who moved like him, with his same deliberate, unhurried gait, crossing the parking lot toward room 114. I watched him through the office window rather than following this time. I had learned something. But as he reached the door, it opened from the inside. Before he arrived, someone already knew he was coming. And standing in the warm gold rectangle of the doorway, backlit and faceless from this distance, was a figure in a white coat. The figure didn't look at the trucker. It looked at the office window, at me. I dropped below the desk level before I fully decided to, some older instinct overriding deliberate thought. I crouched behind the counter with my back against the cabinet, breathing through my nose, and didn't look at the window for the next several minutes. At 5:40, 5 minutes early, I was already in the supply closet with the door locked. I know the rule said 5:45, but my hands were moving before my clock-watching brain registered the discrepancy. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe this time the things on the other side of the door arrived early too. Because it started at 5:42. Not the heavy impact of the first night, something worse, methodical. A slow, measured knock. 3 raps, a pause. 3 raps, a pause. Patient, like someone willing to wait as long as it takes. Like someone who had all the time in the world and knew you didn't. It continued for the full 5 minutes. Exactly 3 raps, exactly even intervals, exactly as long as it needed to be. No variation, no escalation, no attempt to batter the door down, just the steady sound of something that was not going away. At 5:50, it stopped. I waited until 5:52 to open the door. The hallway was empty. No marks, no traces, nothing but the screw that had fallen from the hinge on night 1, which I had not bothered to pick up, still lying on the floor where it had come to rest. I turned the sign on at 6:50, watched the sky go from black to deep blue to gray pink, thought about the 7 blank months, about containment protocol, about the object in my shoe, which I still hadn't looked at. The old man came in at 7. He took one look at my face and didn't say anything for a moment, just set his coat on the hook by the door and poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine in the back room, set one on the counter in front of me. The man in the white coat was in the doorway of 114 last night, I said. He was looking at me. The old man wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I know. What is this place? Not the rules, not the procedures. What is this place actually? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to think he wasn't going to answer. Then, some places are thin, between here and other places, between now and other times. He paused. Between what you remember and what you actually lived. He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd started working here. His eyes were a pale gray-green, and in them was something I hadn't expected to find in this place. Genuine sorrow. What they did to you, son. This place isn't doing it. This place is undoing it. But you are not in control of how fast. Who are they? He shook his head. Not, I don't know, I won't say. "Will you be here tomorrow?" I asked. He picked up his newspaper. "I'm always here," he said. I found the envelope under my windshield wiper when I got to the car. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. The image was overexposed at the edges, the center sharp. Me, in a chair, in a room I recognized as room 114 from what I could see of the equipment around me. My eyes were closed, electrodes at my temples, wrists, throat. My mouth slightly open, caught mid-word or mid-breath, an expression of complete vulnerability on a face I barely recognized as mine. I turned it over. In red ink, a single line. "The experiment isn't over, Daniel. It never was." I sat in the driver's seat of my car in the flat morning light and did not move for a very long time. Rex would be hungry. I had cash in my pocket that I needed to use before the landlord ran out of patience. The world of ordinary obligations continued to exist, indifferent to what I was holding in my hands. I had been in that room. Something had been done to me in that room, and something, had arranged for me to take this job, in this place, knowing exactly who I was, knowing exactly what I'd lost, and had decided that the time had come for me to start finding it again. The question that was beginning to keep me up at night, the question that sat in my chest like a stone now, solid and cold and growing, was not whether I should go back. I would go back. I already knew that. The question was what I would find when I finally remembered, and whether, once I did, there would be anything left of me that was still recognizable as Daniel Marsh.